Welcome to Infidelity Truths. Before we dive into today's gripping story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more thrilling stories just for you. Let's begin.
James and Rebecca had been enduring a silent marriage. There were no fights, no acknowledged affairs, just a growing disconnection, as if they existed in parallel worlds within the same dwelling. Annual trips were still an attempt to reconnect. Italy was next, a promise made at the conclusion of the previous year. It was a plan anticipated with excitement, but just days before departure, James was summoned for an unexpected mission in Atlanta. The headquarters of NextBack required him to present a strategic project to a huge client in the food sector that was about to terminate their contract. It was a genuine promotion opportunity. He explained everything to Rebecca, hoping for support, perhaps a suggestion to reschedule, but she didn't offer any of that. Rebecca listened in silence, crossed her arms, and simply replied, "Then go. I'm going to. Everything is already booked." She said this without looking up. James stood there, staring at the face of the woman he'd shared his life with for over 10 years, trying to understand if there was still anything left there. She left the room and went back to her phone, as if that conversation had ended even before it began. And maybe it really had. He flew to Atlanta the next morning with his mind divided between responsibility and uneasiness. His team waited for 3 intense days of meetings and presentations. The project he defended was a reformulation of packaging focused on sustainability and reducing logistical costs. If he convinced the executives, NextBack would retain the multi-million-dollar contract with FoodStream Plus, open doors in other divisions. James gave it his all, slept little, reviewed the data, anticipated questions, led with confidence. By the end of the second day, the director of FoodStream shook his hand and said, "That's it. We're maintaining the partnership." That was a relief. He should have been happy. But when he returned to the hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The feeling of victory was cloudy. Something was missing to share it with. It was that same night that the photograph arrived. A friend from the city who was also traveling in Europe sent it via cell phone. Rebecca, sitting in an outdoor restaurant in Rome, drinking wine, laughing with a man with a short beard, wearing a dress shirt. David, the same teacher from the school where she worked. The same one James had caught having questionable conversations months earlier. She swore it was just friendship, that he was exaggerating. But that image left no room for doubt. The two were there so comfortable, so close, that only someone wanting to be deceived would think it was innocent. James looked at the screen for minutes. The noise of the air conditioner in the hotel room was the only thing filling the room. He thought about calling, writing, confronting, but at the same time he felt it wasn't worth it. In that moment, he understood something had been broken. And the saddest part was that it didn't catch him by surprise. He just confirmed what he had been ignoring for too long. He returned home 5 days later after finalizing the report, presenting the results to the board, and receiving formal praise for the negotiation. His boss talked about a promotion. He thanked him, but kept the same tone. Firm on the outside, broken inside. He came home with a suitcase in hand and a weight in his chest. Rebecca was there, on the couch. Her hair was tied back, her laptop on her lap, as if nothing had happened. She looked at him, smiled with her lips, and said only, "Hi, how was it there?" James answered with a simple, "Good." No mention of the client, the achievement, the effort he put in. No questions about how Atlanta was. She didn't seem curious. Not guilty either, just indifferent. She said the trip was great, that Rome was wonderful, that she needed it. She didn't mention David, didn't even try to hide the coldness with which she described those days away. James watched her while she spoke. Her voice seemed automatic, like someone recounting something experienced with another person, but trying to pretend it was alone. He waited a bit, thought if she would say anything else, but nothing came. She went back to her laptop, and in that gesture, so simple, James understood that the end had already happened and she hadn't noticed. What remained was the formality of two strangers sharing the same roof out of inertia. He went upstairs, took a shower, looked at his face in the mirror, and decided he would never again put his peace second for someone who didn't even show interest in his achievements. The betrayal wasn't just in the photo, it was in the absence of questions, in the lack of empathy, in the way she pretended everything was fine. The biggest pain wasn't the dinner in Rome, it was returning home with an exhausted soul and realizing that for her, it didn't matter if he had come back or stayed there. When he came out of the bathroom, James looked at his reflection for a few seconds and decided that silence couldn't continue. He walked down with firm steps and found Rebecca sitting on the couch with her laptop on her lap. She looked at him quickly, then returned her eyes to the screen as if nothing was off. "Why was David with you in Italy?" he blurted out without beating around the bush. She froze. Her hands became motionless over the keyboard. "What do you mean?" She tried to gain time. "You know exactly. Why was he there? Why did you spend days with him and not tell me? Was that why you preferred to go alone? Was everything already arranged?" She took a deep breath and closed the laptop carefully, as if that act would protect her from the truth about to come out. "I met him by chance. I didn't even know he was going to Italy," she replied with a trembling voice. James took a step forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "By chance? You work together, talk all day, and you want to make me believe that by chance he showed up in Rome on the same days, on the same route? Cut it out." Rebecca stayed silent for a moment, then ran her hand across her face, frustrated. "You are overreacting. You are being dramatic. That's why I didn't tell you. I knew you would react like this, get jealous, draw conclusions." "I saw a photo, Rebecca. The two of you laughing as if it were a second honeymoon. That's not jealousy. That's observation. And you didn't even have the decency to warn me." She looked away. A knot started forming in her throat. "You already know what happened here, right?" he asked, his voice lower but firm. "What?" "You don't realize your marriage is over," he replied directly, tired. Rebecca put her hands on her face. She cried. But it wasn't a cry of surprise. It was from someone who finally saw the consequence knocking at the door. "It's not like that, James. I didn't want to go alone. I swear. When you said you wouldn't go anymore because of work, I felt abandoned. And then David heard the conversation at work, said that if I wanted, he could accompany me. I accepted. I was going alone, but it happened." James closed his eyes for a moment. All that was worse than he had imagined. It wasn't chance. It was choice, filling in cowardice. Without saying anything more, he turned around, went upstairs to the room, opened the suitcase that hadn't even been unpacked yet, and took some clothes. He crossed the hallway, entered the guest room, closed the door. He wanted distance, needed to sleep, not to rest, but to wake up in a new chapter. Inside him, there were no more doubts, only confirmation that the end had begun much before that trip. And that night, sleeping in another room in his own house, he decided that from now on, nothing would be the same. James woke up before the alarm, his body tired but his mind determined. He dressed in the first clothes he saw and left quietly. He took the car and drove to a nearby cafe near the company. He ordered a strong coffee and a simple bread, the kind he rarely ate, and sat there looking at his phone for a few minutes. He took a deep breath, opened the Contacts app, and searched for the number a colleague had recommended months ago during a random conversation about divorces. It rang twice and was picked up. He spoke firmly, explained the situation, told the main points without being victimizing himself, but making it clear that there was nothing left to save. He said he wanted to file for divorce as soon as possible. The lawyer asked for some documents and agreed to prepare everything. After hanging up, he felt a strange mix of relief and ending. It was like signing the closure of a long phase of life, with everything it brought: joys, frustrations, and now this weight of forced detachment. He went back home late afternoon. Rebecca was in the kitchen stirring something on the stove. He entered straight and said without beating around the bush, "I called a lawyer this morning. He will prepare the divorce papers." She turned with a surprised face, still holding the spoon in her hand. "What do you mean? You already spoke with a lawyer?" "I did," he replied dryly, "and I want this to end quickly." She walked toward him, her voice choked. "James, please." "This is an exaggeration. We're hurt, confused, but we don't need to do it this way. Give me a chance to fix things." He crossed his arms, looked directly at her, and said without changing his tone, "I won't waste another cent on your behalf. That's why I'll stay here until the divorce is done. If you want to stay, stay. If you want to leave, go. If you want to run after David, go ahead. Your life isn't my concern anymore." Rebecca started crying. She tried to get closer, but he moved away. "It doesn't help anymore. You made your choices. Now accept the consequences." The following weeks were mechanical. Two strangers inside the same house. They spoke only what was necessary, avoided eye contact, slept in separate rooms with closed doors and silences, louder than any argument. The lawyer was quick. The process went smoothly, without judicial fights, without disputes over assets. They decided to sell the house and divided the amount. He rented an apartment near the next back headquarters, practical and small. Rebecca, on the other hand, went back to her mother's house. She said she needed time, that she didn't know what to do with her life. He simply replied that he wished she found what she was searching for. In the same week he signed the divorce papers, James received a call from the board. The manager position in the Munich branch was opened. They trusted him, wanted him there. He answered in less than an hour, accepted, sold the car, canceled the lease of the recently rented apartment, and packed his bags. This time he left without looking back, without promises, without farewells. For the first time in years, he felt he was heading towards himself. Munich welcomed him with strangeness. Everything was different. The language was tricky in the first attempts. The supermarkets, the habits, the faces, everything seemed foreign, including himself. In the first days, he dove into work. He avoided the emptiness by taking care of spreadsheets, meetings, and tasks that made him forget. At night, he walked the streets in silence, listening to his own thoughts. On one of his aimless walks, he stopped in front of a flower stand. An elderly man with white hair was organizing the vases with patience. James bought a small bouquet for the apartment. The man thanked him and started a conversation. His name was Walter. He was 72 years old, widowed for 2 decades. He spoke of his wife as if she were still around, told stories with a sparkle in his eyes, and said that true love survives absence. James found himself going there almost every day, not for the flowers, but for the conversations, for the effortless wisdom of that man who had already suffered but didn't let himself harden. One day, Walter said, "Starting over isn't forgetting, James. It's choosing to live again." These words stayed with him. Months later, he met Catherine, his new assistant. She was intelligent, discreet, and had a kindness that didn't invade, just accompanied. Both had complicated pasts. Neither was in a rush. But between meetings, shared coffees, and sincere exchanges, something light grew. A bond that developed without pressure, without fear. Together they began to rebuild the idea of trust, step by step, without fantasies, without masks, just two people willing to discover if it was still possible to love after so much loss. Over time, James began to feel part of Munich. He already knew the routes, the best cafes, and some neighbors greeted him by name. The connection with Catherine grew naturally. Nothing was forced. They shared small routines, a trip to the market, a relaxed dinner, a sincere conversation after a difficult day. They didn't speak of the past with resentment, only with the maturity of those who understood that life is made of cycles. And both, through different paths, were ready to build something clean, light, and genuine. Catherine got pregnant 2 years later. The news came on a common Sunday with a test bought by chance, just to check. She trembled while telling him. James, in silence, held her hand and smiled. He felt he was where he should be. 4. The arrival of the twins changed everything. The apartment was replaced by a house in the outskirts of the city with a small garden and colorful rooms. He reduced his workload to accompany the first months of his daughters. He began to admire the delicacy of Catherine as a mother, her patience during the nights, her attention to details. On weekends, he still visited Walter, brought the girls with him, and the old man smiled with his eyes always when he saw them. He said life was generous to those who didn't harden. And seeing James there with the family after so much pain was proof that love begins again when you stop looking for the old and embrace the new with open arms. 9 years had passed since the end, and life was already different. Nextback, now under his leadership, decided to open the new global headquarters in Chicago. The proposal came as a direct invitation from the presidency. James, now a director, would have total freedom to build the team and design the new strategic branch of the company. He and Catherine talked calmly. The girls were 6 years old. They discussed schools, adaptation, distance from the routine built. But at the end of the conversation, Catherine said, "If it's important to you, we'll do it." That was all he needed to hear. They returned to the United States in early spring. James stepped onto American soil with a different posture. He wasn't the hurt man who had left the country years before. He was someone rebuilt, with scars healed, but still visible enough to remember where he came from. Chicago was busy, noisy, full of opportunities. He jumped into the new headquarters project with enthusiasm, built the team carefully, relearned the American rhythm, reunited with old colleagues. Some were surprised by his presence. Others looked at him with admiration. James had become a reference. One evening, after leaving the office, he decided to take a walk around the old neighborhood where he used to live with Rebecca. The area was different, but some details remained. The newspaper kiosk, the corner park, the Avenue Cafe. He passed in front of the old house. It was for sale. He stood there for a few seconds, observing. No feelings of pain, just a distant memory, like an old photo kept in a drawer that's rarely opened. He felt proud of having had the courage to leave, of not having persisted where there was no reciprocity. The following weekend, he took Catherine and the girls to see the new home. They walked along the lake, played in the park, had dinner in a small, cozy restaurant. The girls laughed loudly. Catherine looked at him with a quiet affection full of mutual gratitude. That night, while putting them to sleep, one of the girls asked, "Daddy, are you happy?" He smiled and answered firmly, "Yes, more than I ever imagined I would be." One day, while feeding the girls in the kitchen, he received a notification on his phone. It was an email from Rebecca. Simple, no drama. She said she was okay, that she followed his journey from afar, and that despite everything, she wished him well. She told him she had divorced David. She said she had mistaken need for love and spent a lot of time trying to forgive herself. She didn't ask to come back, just thanked him for moving on. James read everything in silence, not out of anger, but because there was nothing more to say. That belonged to another time. Life had taken turns. From the end of a marriage suffocated by silence, he built an entire family full of truth. And he learned that rebirth only blooms when you stop waiting for excuses and start offering yourself peace.